Today we're going to discuss the great German Baroque composer Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was born in Eisenach in Germany. It was in fact a backwater in the region of Thuringia, and it's quite remarkable how much he achieved in this part of Germany. He was born into a musical family. He came at the right time in history, at a point at which music had reached its zenith and the contrapuntal art had been developed to the highest level. Bach was initially known as a great organist, first as a church organist, then as a court organist. He served in various positions. There was the Cothen period, then the Leipzig period. He started out in Weimar, and then he was given another position in Cothen. As we mentioned, he moved on to the position in Leipzig. So there were different periods in his life. Each resulted in different forms of productivity. During the Cothen period, he produced his famous Brandenburg concertos. In Leipzig, where he spent the last 27 years of his life, he oversaw a boys' school, the St. Thomas Schule. There were about 50 students that he oversaw, and he taught organ, he taught composition. He was a great improviser. He was consulted when the issue of organ construction came up. So Bach was a jack of all trades, but one could say in his time he was known as a great organist. And in fact, he wasn't even considered the greatest composer of his era. We have turned Bach into this deity, but in fact Bach was essentially a craftsman. He believed music was a craft which could be taught, which could be learned. He felt he was doing a job. That was basically it. And as we mentioned, he lived in a backwater in Germany, not a vibrant place, Thuringia. And he achieved the highest form of contrapuntal craft. He understood how to combine melodies contrapuntally better than anybody before him or after him. Counterpoint had reached its zenith with Bach. He was the master of counterpoint, of polyphony. We're going to consider the genre of the Baroque suite. And what is the connection between Bach and the suite is actually notable. The Baroque suite was a collection of dance movements. There was the courant, the allemande, the jig, various movements which had their origins in different countries. Now, Bach's music, interestingly, actually always has a dance-like character to it. In fact, there's a famous book that discusses this, the dance of Bach. And indeed, it is a genre which works with Bach. His music is always imbued with life, with love of God, with love of life. It is vibrant music. And we're going to see that when we explore his suite number 3 in D major. And we're going to explore the genre of the Baroque suite. We're going to look at each of the movements briefly. We're going to understand how the opening movement is usually non-dance related. It is an instrumental movement. The beginning is slow with regal dotted rhythms, and then the second part of this movement is rapid and fugue-like. And then there's the gavotte, the courant, the gavotte. Both of those were in fact French dances. The sarabande was a Spanish dance, and the jig had its origins in England or Ireland. So Bach was familiar with all the styles of his time, and he actually brought each one of them to the highest possible level. Now we mentioned Bach's contrapuntal skill, but at the end of the day, Bach's counterpoint always worked within a harmonic framework. There was this constant reconciliation of counterpoint with harmony. This was definitive of Bach's music. The harmony had to work with Bach, but at the same time, counterpoint was central to what he did. So we'll see this when we explore this particular work. Bach, in terms of his personal life, he was a devout Lutheran. He was passionate about music. He would walk for miles to hear great organists, apparently 30 miles. He used to walk and go and listen to people like Buxtehude and other great organists. and actually he learned a lot from Buxtehude too. Bach had 22 children, most of them didn't survive. In fact, only 9 of his children survived. Of those, 4 became great composers in their own right, most notably Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. Towards the end of his life, Bach's eyesight deteriorated drastically and he died completely blind. Interestingly, he was known during his lifetime only in Germany. It was only later in 1829 that Mendelssohn staged first performance in about 80 years of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion, and that was what rekindled interest in Bach. Bach's style essentially had 3 contributing factors. There was the Italian influence, the instrumental Italian music, the French dances, and German church music. This unusual combination of influences underpinned Bach's style. We mentioned that Bach's music was characterized by the interplay between counterpoint and harmony. In fact, Bach himself, as a teacher, believed that both of these elements of music should be taught at the same time, counterpoint and harmony. So there was definitely some method in what he was doing. Bach was partial to exploring particular concepts. He would devote whole compendiums to exhausting a problem which was niggling away at his mind. Either he wanted to explore the full workings of a fugal subject, as we see in his Art of the Fugue, or in his other didactic works like the Well-Tempered Clavier, we see his exploration of well-tempered tuning, which had to come about during his time. Or in his 6 cello suites, he devotes himself to the idiom, the instrument of the cello. So he focuses on one instrument or one genre or one conceptual problem. So Bach was very keen in building compendiums devoted to exhausting a problem. Now, we mentioned Bach's suite in D major, which we're going to analyze. Bach also led the Leipzig Collegium Musicum, which was a students' musical organization which performed weekly at a coffee house in Leipzig, and it is thought that this Collegium Musicum in fact staged the first performance of Bach's suite in D major. The link between instrumental music and dance goes back many centuries. During the Baroque era, instrumental music was inspired by the tempo, meter, and rhythm of different dance types. A suite is a set of dance-inspired movements. Each movement is of the same key, but differs in terms of tempo, meter, and character. Each of the movements has different national origins. The Allemande has a moderate pace and is from Germany. The Courante is fast, and the Gavotte is moderate in tempo. These dances both come from France. The Sarabande is slow and solemn and comes from Spain. The Gigue is fast and comes from England or Ireland. Suites were performed in private homes, at court concerts, and as background music. The movements of a suite are usually in 2-part form, and each section is repeated in the format of A, A, B, B. The A section is in the tonic and modulates to the dominant. The B section begins in the dominant and returns to the tonic key. Both A and B sections use the same thematic material. The first movement of a suite is often not inspired by a dance. An example of this is the French overture, which is usually in 2 parts. The first section is slow and uses dotted rhythms. The second section is quick and light and often begins like a fugue. Sometimes part of the opening section returns at the end. The suite was an important instrumental form during the Baroque period. Even works not called suite often have several dance-inspired movements. Movements of this nature tend to have symmetrical phrases which correspond to the symmetry inherent in dance movement. Bach wrote 4 suites for orchestra. They were probably performed by the Collegium Musicum in a Leipzig coffee house. Bach's Suite No. 3 in D major is scored for 2 oboes, 3 trumpets, timpani, strings, and basso continuo. It opens with the French overture, which exploits the grandness of the trumpet. The opening is slow and uses dotted rhythms. Here you can hear the beginning of the fast section, which begins like a fugue, with an upward moving theme introduced by the first violins and then imitated by the other instruments. This fast section is comparable to a concerto grosso in that it sees an alternation of tutti passages with passages for only a few instruments. Here you can hear the return of the slow tempo material with the dotted rhythms and grand mood of the opening section. This movement is scored only for strings and continuo. It contains one of Bach's best-loved melodies. Its serene lyrical character contrasts with that of the opening French overture. It is written in the style of an Italian aria. This movement is not dance-inspired. It is in A-A-B-B form. The B section is double the length of the A section. The bass line moves continuously with a rhythmically irregular melody in the violins. Here you can hear the beginning of the section B theme. The gavotte is in duple meter and at a moderate tempo. This movement uses the full orchestra. This movement is a livelier dance than the gavotte and is also in duple meter. It is in AABB form. A uses the full orchestra, trumpets and timpani. B is 3 times the length of A. This movement alternates between the loud tutti passages and softer passages for strings and oboe. This is the concluding movement of the suite. It is a lively dance movement in 6/8 time. It is in AABB form. The timpani and trumpets join the orchestra at different points throughout the movement. Dance music was so central to life during the Baroque that dance rhythm permeated both instrumental and vocal music of this time, both secular and sacred. By the second half of the 18th century, the suite had been replaced by genres such as the sonata, symphony, and concerto. Ultimately, the suite evolved into the sonata form of later periods.